I kind of grew up on comics, and I really like the X-Men. For some reason, I just feel like there's all these superheroes sort of, they're all trying to figure out how to, sort of control their powers and figure out how to sort of work within a group, and everybody's very different, and people have skills that are bordering on dangerous, right? There's this element of,
I love it. That's a great analogy.
It's a high-powered bunch, and it's really exciting, and I feel like part of our job is leadership, or Professor X, whatever it is. It's really understanding individuals, realizing temperament, and skill, and special ability, and all this both needs some sort of refinement, control, like development, and there's this sort of greater sense of something that it's not you and your problems and you and your personal ambitions. There's like, hey, let's focus as a team on saving the world or whatever we're going to do.
Right.
And so it's a really interesting thing to try and get so many different personalities who look at the world very differently and all contribute to this kind of greater good. And we're kind of excited to be able to keep that kind of thing going because when you have X-Men around, special things happen.
So can you talk a little bit about that? So the culture of tipping, and we know it's different. We talked a little bit about how you guys kind of looked at things a little bit differently and have had some really good success with bringing up young folks and training them. And I think you and I talked a little bit before last, it wasn't always that way, right? I think maybe there was a moment a while back, maybe it was at the merger or I'm not sure exactly when it was, when you kind of took a really deep look at the way that you wanted the culture to look. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think as the firm grew, there was an obvious need to really focus on more organized effort in designing things, a collaborative approach, an idea that, we're really part of a long chain of, processes, and we're dealing with often dozens of people in a design project. And once you get past the sort of one person, one architect, one engineer design kind of dynamic, I think it becomes complex. And I think that culture needs to support that. And what we found over the years is that that engineers really need to train themselves in terms of the design interactions. And that's a thing you don't learn in school, right? It's one thing to be professional and personable and sort of share your professional opinion, but when you're in a code creation process, it's a really different kind of mindset. And so we found that in order for folks to feel comfortable doing that and to get better at doing that on more complex design tasks, that you really had to create something that was a little different internally. So you can kind of like bring people into a mindset of how to bring out the best in a group setting, or how to take ideas and sort of develop them, refine them, present them, share them. And I think that approach really leads to a moment where you're going, got to spend a lot of time working on the internal dynamics and how people feel. And ultimately people want to feel like, they're in a safe spot. They can take risks and do things that maybe hadn't been done. And that's really the secret of who we are. It really sort of molded a certain kind of identity that was always there, but it sort of molded it on a scale that is much bigger and much more, I think, relevant for more complexity and more people, more I think, scale, really.
Right. So do you think, so it sounds like it's an investment, right? When you're looking to bring on somebody new, you're going to invest a lot of time and a lot of training into them. And I feel like this is my own personal experience. I feel like a lot of firms are looking for somebody to plug and play right away. And that's where there's the sentiment in the market right now, which is it's incredibly hard to find good engineers, right? You just can't, they're not out there. And when you got them, they're demanding a lot of money and, with this, and this, and there's all these reasons why we can't hire good people. Do you think the antidote to that, is it the culture? Is it the training, or is it something else? What do you think?
Well, definitely engineering is something that requires a lot of skill and practice. And you'd certainly, as a leader in a company, would love to have plug and play, right? I mean, it's sort of a very business-minded approach where you just go, all I need is people with the right skills, match them up with the project with our needs, and, sort of step aside. And sure, when that happens, that's nice. But I don't think, in my experience, that hasn't been the rule. And generally speaking, it's not so modular in terms of the plugging and playing. There's a lot of nuance and subtlety in terms of how every practice approaches their clients and why they're hired in the first place and what they're supposed to bring to the game. And so you can have some some real miscues if you send people who are, quote, ready to go and kind of plug in what they think is needed, and really just doesn't work well. So there is a risk, and we've been successful and also unsuccessful in terms of, bringing people in at a senior level and expecting to be, tipping kind of high level operative, right? At the same time, as you say, the investment's really important. So even if you're bringing senior people in, there's just acculturation that we think is really important. And our clients aren't hiring us because they saw something in an ad, they're hiring us because they know us, they trust us, they feel comfortable with how we work, they understand what we bring to the game, and all that kind of subtlety isn't really something you can just script out in a resume and say, I'm the one to fill that role. So for us, it's very much a long game. And it's kind of always been the case, mostly because of the scarcity of talent, is you kind of got to draw from the inexperienced pool. So you got to go to the universities, you got to often work with folks and, maybe not in the mainstream of their careers, and trying to line people up who are not always sort of perfect fits in the way that engineers really want them to be. And out of that, we've kind of got a diverse mix of folks with different interests, some in architecture, some in sort of design, some in construction. And what it's done over time is it's kind of created actually kind of a strength out of we're kind of say desperate or something, and you really just need to fill the ranks and invest in them. And over time, we found out that's actually kind of been our strength, and we've never really shifted that approach. I'd say most of our folks, they were brought in, out of school, either just out of school or early out of grad school. And we tend to look at people not only from the skills that they bring, but also some of their life experience, folks who spend some time in AmeriCorps or spend some time in construction sites, or, really had kind of a experience that created a bit of passion. So we're looking for that passion. And that's, I think, easy to find in folks because they don't have a lot more to put on their resume. So they come in, full of talent, promise, and passion, we hope. And that's been a really successful play for us. It's a long play. So it assumes you're going to be okay with investing in their development by the time that young people become really productive in a billable context, et cetera. It takes some time, it takes some seasoning. There's some definite phases before you get your PE, once you get your SE, and you can kind of operate independently with clients. So that journey is one that we all support one another on, and that takes a long time. And there's an investment there. There's also a risk, right? People move on. Usually young people maybe change their mind about what they want to do. So There's a risk of that, right? But more often than not, when we're patient, and actually we've gotten better at this over the years, and we're actually careful and deliberate about the way in which we develop our employees, they stick around. And not only that, but they stick around and become these marvelous practitioners who know exactly how to operate, right? And that all that does is just kind of go, every time we get tipping, it's like another A-team, right? Because the people that show up, it's not that they're more skilled than the competitors. It's just that they're more in tune with everything we try to bring to a client. So when they show up, they're kind of speaking the client's language. They can get up and represent us in a way that's authentic. And that's really important for us. Like that authenticity bit is a really key thing of why people pick us. And people don't really distinguish between the good engineer and the bad engineer. They're really, it's kind of a gut call, and they want to hear you speak. They want to hear you communicate. So those are the types of things we try to instill in particularly the young folks. And they're impressionable. It's easy to, they're just out of school. They're still ready to learn. And if we're good at teaching, they're usually excellent at developing and learning. So that's kind of been our secret for a while.
Just a quick point on the training. I heard this a long time ago, and it just becomes more and more true to me every day, which is companies that are afraid to train folks because they might leave, right? Which is a very real thing in the design world right now, right? You literally might invest in somebody and they might pick up and get a better offer from another firm, or, go to another state or something along those lines. And the question is, well, what if we invest all this time and money into them and they leave? And the reverse of that is, what if we don't invest any time, any money into them and they stay? Right. And that's like, it's almost this, you have to be vulnerable as an employer and be willing to put yourself out there and be willing to train people and understand that they could leave. But I think you might agree, more often than not, you build that culture that they really, really want to stay, and they become A players. Right.
Yeah, I think it certainly is a big cost, and there's always pressure to the contrary, saying, "Hey, how much of our profits are we sinking into this?" Especially when you don't have stellar years, there's always a question about, is that worth it? Is that extra energy and resource devoted to training and development worth it? I think in a way the answer can only be yes. I mean, I don't have a good example of practicing in a way that's not like that, not least in our field, in our sort of ecosystem of design practice and area. I think that certainly we have to kind of acknowledge the risk and acknowledge the cost, which also says, well, if that's the cost of doing our business, then we got to get good at it and actually both not make it such a burden and B, actually have it be the reason people don't go away, right? Because people aren't sticking around because you're giving them $5 more or whatever. People are sticking around because they're doing meaningful work, they're learning, they're teaching, they're making themselves a part of the practice as a cultural mode, so that you sort of don't, you don't operate out of a sense of some sort of numerical metric of what you got to do, but you operate a sense of like, how am I serving my team, my clients, my brand, so to speak. And I think that's really like when people make that connection, we'll make sacrifices for them and they'll make sacrifices for us. And this is what kind of makes us a little different in the sense that we do really value that. And we kind of realize like, life happens and people we've trained from, early on out of school, eventually decide they've got a life elsewhere. Right. And that's okay. And that's okay too. There's moments in time when we had a lot of young people and maybe too few people kind of guide them. Right. And it creates anxiety about the quality of the work. And it creates anxiety about who's going to pick up, some slack or do some extra. And so I think the balance needs to be right. I think you have to be conscientious of the people who are on the front lines of training, like, hit this button. Okay, now you hit that button, right? There's a lot of really granular sort of learning that happens. And so there's got to be a teacher. And that teacher often is the one investment in not just money, but their own time and energy and passion. So that needs to be recognized. And I think we've gotten better at acknowledging those costs and personal costs and understanding how to make that burden less, understanding how to spread it around, understanding how to ultimately balance the workload, so it's not always like, God, there's just so much to teach. And so we've gotten a nice groove where there's plenty of teachers, plenty of learners, and that curve is not that it's steep, but it's one where we feel like gets you up and running, gets you confident. The sense I get is most graduates coming out of school, they're bewildered for the first few months. Things move fast. The industry, right? Things are happening on a 15-minute increment. There's clients who are coming at you from different contract. I mean, there's just so much different kind of input. So it takes a bit of time. You got to quiet things down. You got to like create a bit of a shelter around folks and say, here's the important stuff. Concentrate on this, and eventually start peeling away the defenses, and they start really experiencing the ebb and flow of projects and design and interacting. And that's where, if we do it right, they can jump into that confidently. Right.
So do you do that? And I don't want to give away the secret sauce, but do you do that by pairing somebody new up when you hire somebody just out of school? Do they get some type of a mentor? Are they attached to some specific person, or are they just kind of shadowing for a while? Or are they just kind of giving them basic work to do? Or like, what does that look like?
There's almost a little bit of everything you described.
Okay.
We have a group of folks who actually, that's their job. They meet, monthly and figure out how to improve the process, get feedback. We're doing a much better job of interns these days. We had some incredible interns, so it wouldn't have been possible without like a sort of a team of people that were just all over it. They had it all scripted out, and they shared the burden. They got together and figured out what was important, kind of understood the people that we were dealing with, kind of felt what was important for them, how to make them productive in our practice. And that was really great. And I think that's one of those things where you can't leave it on somebody to just kind of like, oh, guy's coming up Monday morning. He doesn't know anything. Better make sure, that you get up and run. And that's pretty stressful.
Right.
So we've gotten pretty good. There's a group of people, and by and large, it starts with sort of, I'd say little concentric rings around the individual. There's usually a very, very strong, kind of relationship with a supervisor who's not so senior as they don't have time to deal with it, but not so junior as to not be able to answer sort of fundamental questions about what to do. And ultimately, there's also a little bit of a resource network of mostly people of the same age and experience level who can kind of share information and knowledge. And people are pretty plugged in on Slack or whatever they need to do. We got a pretty fluid information exchange, and that really helps. Like You got to have a transparent office. Like you got to have information handy. People have to know where to reach to get things. It can't be like, oh, where's that spreadsheet? I'll just make a new one. Or how do we do this one thing? I'll just go figure it out. It's a very like well connected. So everybody understands what that new person might be in charge with. There's a little bit of a support network around that particular set of tasks, but also in general. And then just the social part of just having people be available for like, I know we don't have an in-person thing going too strongly yet, but there's lots of team meetings, lots of touches, lots of development follow-ups, quarterly check-ins. There's actually kind of a formal thing. We're going, hey, how are you doing in these hard skills? How are you doing in these soft skills? And really trying to pinpoint things both in quality and time, right? So you kind of go, oh, here's a thing that maybe, we should be thinking about. And, here's kind of a stretch of time you might be thinking about an arc of developing a particular set of skills that might be important. So it's all over. We're just kind of all over it.
I love it. And so to your point about COVID, you guys are still remote, I believe, right? 100% remote or pretty close to it. How is that changed? How is a lot of this changed? Because so much of this I feel like is easier to do in person, right? It's if you have an office of folks together and you've got somebody new, or you're just training somebody, or you just have questions, right? It is very easy to turn to your left, turn to your right, and say, "Hey, Leo, real quick, what is this?" What do you think about the changes there?
I think, it's a really important point. I mean, I think our goals haven't really changed, but boy, just about everything else has in terms of tactics, tools, habits. One of the, when you mention this, one of the interesting things I reflect on, and I'm not sure if people really talk about it, but, back in the day before the COVID, people showed up at work, right? You kind of put your work clothes on and you'd show up and you'd sit at a work desk and you were kind of a worker. And you looked like the other workers, and you try to fit into that mold, and it was like a physical place, kind of occupy the same place, breathe the same air, right? Yeah. Better for worse. And COVID sort of tore apart that sort of idea that people are kind of the same, or they show up in the same way, sit at the same desk. Some people stand up, some people sit down, but basically it's like, and it really blew apart like this idea that everybody's operating similarly. It just completely accentuated everybody's personal cadence about when to wake up, what to do first, and it just sort of like, boy, it really clustered, I'd say, people a little by age, a little by circumstance, a little by position and role in the company. And we ended up with just a lot more heterogeneous, like, set of conditions. Where we're just like, oh, some people are here, some people are there, some people love it here, some people hated it. So it just became like even more obvious like how important just the individual things are. So we, I'd say by and large, folks with commutes and families and other logistics, things just fine being at home, and they got it all figured out. They know their work, they know their clients, they know their job, and so they can operate very efficiently. So that's fine. On the other hand, the young people are just like, I don't know, I got an apartment down the block, and and like, what am I supposed to do in this big thing? So we do really emphasize connections. There's a lot of the senior folks that lead projects have sometimes daily meetings with their teams. Sometimes it's a weekly. So we have lots of nested discussions, and yeah, that takes more time too, right? All the commute hours, you're not driving, you're probably sitting in extra meetings, which I don't know what's better. But but I think it's important for people to feel that connection. And we've onboarded, I'd say it's safe to say about 10 people since COVID started. So it's been a very dynamic environment. So I'd say that, we're not quite 100% remote. We have a skeleton crew, but I'd say that, I'm here most days. We have some folks who kind of are here either most days or 3 or 4 days out of the week, kind of thing. And so we have a place, and if folks want to come and be at the office, it's completely open. New folks typically are encouraged to be in the office. We're still masked up, which is a little bit of an inconvenience. Unless, of course, you're lucky enough to be in an office, close the door, you're working with a mask. So that's not really super. Yeah. But we do have about 5 people who are, kind of mostly in the office or on the engineer level. And they're mostly the young people we've brought on, as, new employees. And we think it's really important because if you've already got relationships and work in progress, you can kind of go remote and sustain it. But if you got to start something new with someone new and kind of bring them up to speed, it's a really difficult thing. And so it's a struggle. I won't say everybody's like thrilled with the situation. But we're trying to just understand that, the young people coming into their career and coming into this office, into this practice, just they need to have a little bit of presence, like a few people actually near them to like take their headphones off and kind of go, hey, what do you think about this?
Like, do you have, like a curriculum in your head with a younger person? You've just hired somebody out of school or a new person. I need to make sure that they hit this, this, and this. Or is it more, hey, we're going to put you on this project with this team and whatever comes up, and then we'll go through it as it goes?
Again, people being individuals that kind of come in with their own set of interests, like we're dealing with engineers. So they're not usually coming in with this idea of like, I'm going to interact with tons of people. I'm going to be out there and talk about our brand. It's just, that's not where they often start. And, and a lot of them are very like, I'd say really focused on the quiet work. So that where do you how do you identify those things or not let some of those things become obstacles to their development, right? So we look at the person, and some folks are really confident and ready to interact and get into certain things, but are maybe still developing certain technical skills. Other people might be super technical and they're quite good at developing the work, but they may not feel terribly comfortable in terms of decision making or just being involved in sort of the ebb and flow of design discussion. So I think we try to round people out as much as we can. Without blunting their edge, right? I mean, I think there's a certain sense of going, hey, if that's what somebody operates really effectively in a particular place, we don't just want to like be like, yeah, that's fine, but let's do this other thing. At the same time, you gotta have some breadth in your ability to operate, and so that just takes usually developing things that are good and filling gaps that are just kind of not recognized. And you find over time, people do find, hey, business is exciting. I love winning jobs. And I want to talk about what it is that, brought the client to us. So other people are like, hey, I'm glad, that's great, but I got this really exciting, complicated thing, and I'm going to be in the woodshed for a couple of months working on some analysis stuff. And figuring out how to blend all that, it's definitely a strange type of calculus where you're just going, okay, how do we build teams? But we definitely try to make people live in different teams, different, like internally, like, okay, you've been with this group doing a project for 2 years, it's great. Why don't we shift you over? Maybe it's a different material type or just a different pace of projects. And that's usually important. And engineers need like some kind of variety. What we found is that we can't do the work we do if the work's monotonous. And we've got all these people who are like super creative. They want to make an impact in the world. They want to do great things. And the last thing you want to ask them to do is just do it exactly like last time. But faster.
Right. That's such an interesting idea, to be well-rounded, but also to let somebody kind of double or triple down on their strengths, right? It's like some people are going to be best going out and talking to clients, going out, meeting with the design team, leading, right? Some people just have more innate leadership abilities and some people don't, and that's okay. You need to have a little bit, like you need to have enough to get by in all these areas, right? But at some point it's like, let's, do what you love, do what fulfills you, right? And let you do what you're good at if that's what you want to do. So
I kind of grew up on comics, and I really like the XMen. For some reason, I just feel like there's this XMen thing going on where there's all these superheroes sort of, they're all trying to figure out how to, sort of control their powers and figure out how to sort of work within a group, and everybody's very different, and people have skills that are bordering on dangerous, right? There's this element of,
I love it. That's a great analogy.
It's a high-powered bunch, and it's really exciting, and I feel like part of our job is leadership, or Professor X, whatever it is. It's really understanding individuals, realizing temperament, and skill, and special ability, and all this. Both needs some sort of refinement, control, like development, and also that there's this sort of greater sense of something that, it's not you and your problems and you and your personal ambitions. There's like, hey, let's focus as a team on saving the world or whatever we've got to do. And so it's a really interesting thing to try and get so many different personalities who look at the world very differently and all contribute to this, kind of greater good. And we're kind of excited to be able to keep that kind of thing going. Because when you have XMen around, special things happen, right? There's always some
That's such a cool analogy. I love it. I love it. It's very true, right? It is very true. It's about developing
School
people.
for the gifted, right?
School for the gifted. That's so fantastic. I love it. All right, two more questions for you, and one of them selfish to me because I live in the world of risk management for architects and engineers, and we've done some stuff with you guys, some education programs with the team, and one of the things I notice about doing education programs with tipping is that we do not have to fight very hard to get people engaged. They're in it. They want to learn. They want to ask questions. They ask great questions about contracts and QA QC and all these types of things as we take on risk. So my question would be, what is it that you're saying to your people about risk and kind of how to think about it, that you've built this, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally, you've built this culture of risk management at tipping? How does that talked about from the top down?
Well, we don't refer to it as risk management because we lose our audience. Right?
Fair enough.
We refer to it as some combination of care and curiosity, right? So you got to care enough about what you're doing to like really get into the thing. I go, now, why should I be interested in this? Well, it's like, well, if you don't pay attention to this, bad things happen. There's safety issues, there's risk, liability, there's all sorts of, let's say bad things that can happen. People know, like engineers know, even if they're young, the weight of the judgments they need to make on a daily basis about, whether something's stable or not. It weighs heavy. You go home thinking about you did that calc right or not, right? And they take it very seriously. Now, what do? Like, pull their hair out. They kind of like, there's all sorts of responses, stress responses. Like, what we try to do is kind of acknowledge, like, yeah, there's a risk. Everybody out there every day, even if you're young or whatever, you're taking direct responsibility. You're making judgments about is something safe or not all the time. And you got to understand that. Now, at the same time, you got to understand, well, look, some of them aren't that consequential. Other ones are consequential, but maybe rare or highly unlikely. And then you just got to understand, like, it's slippery here. You're just going to need to pay extra attention. And so I think we layer in the right level of thinking. So if we're dealing with a junior engineer, it's like, if there's something that seems unclear to you, like, stop and ask the question. If you got there and see something that doesn't look right, like, we don't expect you to like throw the red flag, stop construction project. We just need you to be super alert. We need you to care about every little thing that's going on. So you can stop and say, is this right? Is this correct? Let me go talk to somebody. Let me bring this up. So the communication part is really important. Like, hey, this sounds off. I actually care about this enough to go and ask a few questions and then usually bring my confidence level up. Our whole job as engineers is having high confidence determinations, right? It's like a series of determinations where you go, yep, I'm 95% there. I like 95%. Most people are pretty comfortable. And so how do you get from 75% to 95%? Is you talk to people, you ask the question. And so from a junior engineer, it might be like, hey, I checked this beam. We're trying to figure out if it can support a live load of 100 PSF, right? Everybody's got a lab and everybody wants 100 PSF on their floors, but everybody's got an old building. And so there's always this like, hey, are my beams strong enough to hold up my new tenant? And it's pretty consequential, right? If you say yes and the tenant moves in, it doesn't work, so it's not a big deal, but this is like minor stuff. You do this every day. Yeah, check these 4 beams and 3 columns and the slabs, and the slabs work, the columns don't, whatever the combination of answers are. So how do you go from, well, the junior engineer, there might be a likelihood there's some mistake somewhere, or they didn't ask some question or whatever. How do you get past that and get to 95%? Well, you can make sure they talk to someone before they produce their answer. Then you make sure somebody looks at that final answer and says, yep, it's what I thought. And then you finally, maybe kind of go, okay, the 3 of us have looked at all this. Here's what it is. Then that's what risk management looks like day to day. I think when you talk to more senior people, they're like, well, my risk is having not enough conversations with my charges, or not having heard my client well enough, or not having something in my contract that was, the way it's supposed to be. So it takes on a bigger, more weighty kind of risk management. And then we talk to the senior people, obviously they're talking risk management. Right. But before you're talking risk management, you're managing the confidence of your own decision making. And that's really an important one, because it starts at very individual. Like, I can't either prevent or cause too much in this arena, right? There's 38 people working away. Their day-to-day activities basically constitute whether we're going to be more at risk or not. And I think it's the internal culture. It says we care. We do not want problems. We want everybody. We want us to be a shining example of how to operate in a way that, you know, creates minimal risk and creates happy clients and, you know, very, very little bad stuff. Right. Of course, that's just ideal. So people know, they go, yeah, my actions mean something. And I know that if I've got a concern, somebody cares enough to listen to me. And if something's wrong, then we're not going to paper over it. We're going to get in there and like figure out, look, oh, something's wrong. We made a mistake, whatever. Contractor made a mistake, you know. It was just something happened. Nobody can foresee. And get in there and try to solve the problem, because that's usually what happens. You start burying issues and not talking about them and pretending they'll just go away. And that's where problems generate. So for us, it's like really creating a culture of like, you know, keep your eyes open, really engage deeply in this stuff. When you talk about engagement, I mean, this is what we train. You got to get engaged. And if people are like, yeah, I don't know, then we're like, maybe you're not right for us. That's what it's like.
Right.
It's a cultural thing, because you do have to be, you know, are you here with me? And it starts with that care.
I love it. That was a great answer. One of the things that I love to ask from the architectural foundation standpoint, and just from my own knowledge, is what advice would you give to an up and coming design professional? Since you have an up and coming design professional in the family, I think you've probably thought a little bit about that. So what would be your best advice we'll just dial it in on an engineer, right? A young up and coming structural engineer. What skill sets would you tell them to develop, and what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I feel like I'm in the advice business, so I'm feeling like I'm prepared for this one. I think it's similar to the way in which we advise young professionals entering our own practice. You know, there's a lot of those kind of parallels where you got to be a bit of a parent figure, because the people coming in, by and large, aren't necessarily aware of all the subtleties, what it takes to run a business, and what their day-to-day work will mean, how it feels to be sitting at a desk for X years doing, you know, some task. And I think for me, at least when I tell my daughters, like, you get some experience, you know, in things that aren't necessarily sitting at a desk and doing problems, right? Get out there, whether it's just travel or some kind of work travel or some kind of more education or postdoc or a job that's not intended to be your last career job, but just like season yourself to what it means to work with teams of people in different locations, understand that people are diverse. Not everybody understands the same language, even if you're speaking English, and bring that sensitivity into the work, bring that sensitivity into your professional career. Because I think one of the things about engineering, at least, it's insular, right? We, by and large, really focus on engineering. At least most schools do really focus on engineering education, like in year 2. You know, you write a few essays freshman year, and by and large, then it's like, you know, most of your life's going to be writing stuff, right? And I was trying to avoid that. I was like, I'm not going to be an English major. You tell me an engineer, I'm not going to write papers for us. And I'm always writing stuff, right? You know, understand the value of communication, understand that there's different modes of doing that. And I think bring that in. I mean, I think most graduates are just ready to get the job, right?
Yeah.
It's a great time to be a graduate. Everybody's getting multiple offers. If you're from a good school and, you know, you're representing yourself well, I think you're basically assured a good, decent job. But, you know, I think most people coming in are unaware of what that job looks like,
right?
In a year, 3 years, 5 years. Who are you really working for? You know, you're not really working for me, right? At some point, you're making independent judgments and taking care of your client and your task. And, you know, it's sort of, there's a weightiness to this. I don't think that everybody understands that. So for me, it's like, get around, you know, look around. And also understand, like, do you like working in an office? Like, don't get yourself for life of working in the office if you don't like sitting at the desk for long stretches. And I think this is one where people don't, and most engineers are good at that, you know, like kind of homework problems they kind of read. But, you know, it's not for everybody. And I don't think people understand, just like, feels different than school, you know. There's a pace to it. It's the pace of business. It's new. It's just grabbing onto the freight train. So I think a little bit of maturity, a little bit of, you know, getting out and finding some diverse experience is really nice. I say read a lot too. This is hard for, like, I don't know, these days. I don't know, I'm getting too old, but I'd say, like, there's a lot to, like, getting outside of your, what you've been trained to do. Get good at what you've not been trained to do, you know, and find that passion. Like, people don't learn how to draw, right? So all we do is produce drawings, right? Nobody comes out of school with skills to draw. And that's one of those things where I kind of encourage folks to kind of, like, take an interest, you're so young, right? You're in your 20s. Like you can literally master multiple things,
Right.
and your brain's fresh. I don't know if you've read Art Gensler's book, Art's Way, but there's a lot of that really pithy, really cool. Oh, get it. It's an easy read.
Yeah, I need to.
There's a lot of pictures. You can get through it in a couple cities. But it's just really, one, I think it's from a generation that I grew up around, like Steve and, Art. I think they had a way of doing business that was kind of recognized that it wasn't just all about, number crunching or kind of focusing on the work that you're, sort of focused on, but really taking a wider view of family, clients, and your own position, your own brand, your relationships within. And so that's been a really nice thing for me to focus on. It's just this idea of, how to operate in a way that's not at the expense of something. Because a lot of work environments, they kind of eat all your time, and, they suck all your energy, and that's not a good thing.
No.
I know it's intense, and it's nice to be intense, but it's also nice to feel like take a breath and, look at what you've done and appreciate that. So I think that doesn't come without a little bit of like forcing your head to be up and looking around and seeing what's really interesting in this whole thing.
That's incredible advice. It really is. And I love it because it's not go study harder, go learn more, go read more structural engineering books, go get better at math, right? It is go do things that may not be necessarily seem related to it, but I promise you they are. Once you get into a work environment, you will need to be able to use some of those skills. And some of these core principles carry over very, very well, right? So awesome, Leah. That's a great place for us to leave it. Thank you so much for your time. This was excellent. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure talking to you, Zach. It's always great. Thank you for inviting me.